Thank you for the introduction, although I must say you got the name slightly wrong. It is, after all, Lord Alexander Cypher Cunningham-Rex III. But between friends, we allow such transgressions. You want to know how I saved the Orient Express from Sheikh Ramad Ajid? That's a long tale to tell, but I'll give it a whirl, and I'll try not to bore you too much, so you can't drink as much. I dry docked in Calais, my ship, the better part of Valor, which, if anyone asks, is not a pirate ship at all. It has cannons for its own defence, and the hull it has usually comes back to dock with is my own, even if I don't have receipts for everything. But I was dry docked in Calais with some, just some general ship damage you get from time to time, fire, cannon rounds, stuff like that. Stuff you just pick up on the way, you can't help that. I wouldn't happen across my friend, Lord Knight and his wife. And being old customers of mine, they invited me over for a little trip, as it were. And decided to take me over to Paris on a little train and pay for my entrance onto the Orient Express. Now, I was stuck in Calais for about a week, waiting for my ship to get repaired at the very least, and I thought to myself, I could do with a holiday. So, off I trotted as I went over to Paris and with Mr. and Mrs. Knight, and from there we boarded the Orient Express, which is a fabulous train. I do highly recommend the journey for anybody who is a connoisseur of the finer things in life. I saw many very interesting people over there. English nobility, Italian politicians, French people that wanted to become aristocrats, but sadly there are no more. But one thing that did strike me as rather peculiar was Sheikh Ramad Ajid and his two manservants. One a strapping young boy, and the second a huge and giant man, probably was at least 7 foot tall, quite a giant. I remember on the night we left Paris, remember chatting to him in the restaurant carriage, asking what he was doing, and he mumbled some waffle and some stuff about inheritance and getting what he deserved. I thought he was just talking about his brothers or something like that. Little did I know the sinister intention they had in mind. For it was on the overnight travel as we went into Germany that things truly became somewhat strange. I remember I was sat there with Mr. and Mrs. Knight enjoying a fine vintage, and I believe it was a sea bass. Yes, a sea bass, that was it. Rather enjoying it, as I do, when Mrs. Knight made such a shriek, as women are to do. Because the head of my sea bass, I like to see the head, you see. I like the expression of where they go, why? Because you're so darn tasty, that's why. But apparently the head started moving, its eyes were blinking, and its mouth was agape, like this. And I thought, that is rather peculiar. I've never in my travels seen anything like that. I lie, of course. I've seen many strange things in my travels. After all, I do go to New Orleans. But yes, it was quite unnerving, and it almost put me off my food. But sadly, my dinner was to be interrupted because it was not a localised incident. It would appear that all of the dishes upon the plates of all the nobles within the carriage were somehow reanimated, despite being heavily butchered and cooked. It is quite something to see a steak try to make a gallop for freedom, as it drags itself across the floor, leaving a rather delicious sauce behind. Either way, it turns out looking around that not at that point. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. It's at that point that a few robed figures in dark hooded robes, you know the stereotypes, we've all read the Penny Dreadfuls, we know what we're talking about, burst in, along with the huge giant of a man in robes. No mistaking who that could be, I'll tell you now. And declaring in their tongue, and thankfully I know a little bit of Arabic so I could get along just by, that the souls of the ones boarding the train were to be claimed in the name of Sheikh Ramaj Ajid, so he could resurrect his long dead and incredibly powerful tutor. Not a ballet tutor, not a piano tutor, but his necromancy tutor. Although the ability to resurrect somebody, I would imagine, would be the height of the particular level of the arcane arts he was delving in. But supposedly, even if he was capable of doing that, it would still be a case of he would have to get more tuition. I'm not quite sure where you go from beyond that, but I don't dabble in the dark arts as much as other people do. Either way, the robed figures, in their murderous intent, started attacking some of the people aboard the train. Now, when it comes to the nobility that usually boards the Orient Express, you get quite a varied mixture. Sadly, guns are usually not allowed on the Orient Express, which means, well, they are, but you have to keep them in your carriage, or you have to keep them in the stowage. So when they drew knives and started to attack the guests, they were probably somewhat aghast that I'd managed to sneak my family revolver onto the train. As I drew it from my coat, I remember Mr. Knight giving me somewhat of a disgusted look. I'd somehow broken some kind of etiquette within the boundaries of the society I was currently adrift in. Either way, I put one round into each of the fellows with the daggers proceeding up the carriage towards me, causing the giant of a man to step forward. I remember putting 4 more rounds into his chest, expecting him to fall down, and he never did. I thought to myself, maybe he's one of these chaps of an unholy constitution. There is only one way to deal with this. So I kicked him in the balls. Turns out that the chappie wasn't alive. Hasn't been alive for a long time. This fine specimen of a Jamaican man was undead, a zombie, if you will. So the rounds I'd put into his chest and the testicles, which I had planted back firmly into his scrotum with one swift kick, did little to impede him, as he picked me up and threw me across the room. Now, if you can imagine, this is quite a chaotic scene at this point. You've got women screaming, men trying to defend their women with whatever cutlery they can have to hand, and everyone's meals slowly trying to slither away. I thought to myself, this calls for a special solution. Now, I've dealt with the occult before. After all, I have been to New Orleans, and those tales of mermen that float around the sea are not always fictional. I know that certain arts and certain magics and certain creatures have affinities to certain metals. So I keep around with me in my breast pocket 3 special bullets for such an occasion. One tipped with cold iron, one tipped with silver, one tipped with gold. Because generally speaking, the brass and the steel, which makes the average bullet, tends not to stop the darker arts. I quickly loaded all 3 bullets into my revolver, spanned the chamber round and cocked it, and fired all 3 into his chest. The giant, of course, not Mr. Knight, although he was getting a bit annoying now, with his constant, "Don't worry dear, I'll save you," despite not doing much apart from arranging the cutlery in such a way that it could potentially be used to scratch somebody. Now, I'll never find out which of those magical bullets actually did anything. I highly suspect 2 of them did nothing at all. The 3rd one, however, did slay him. He laid down dead at that point. Now, I wasn't particularly surprised when the hood was drawn back to reveal the giant of a man that the Sheikh had brought along with him. So, remembering where I saw him on the list of the guests in the first class carriage, I made my way over to there straight away. And as I progressed down the corridor, which goes down one side of the carriage, I heard the most frightful chanting and blasphemous words. Now again, my Arabic is a bit suspect, so I wasn't able to understand all of it. I suspect my sanity prefers that. But when I did come across the Sheikh's room, there was the awful stench of coppery blood in the air. Ironic. Opening the door with my wanted method of giving a swift boot to it, revealed a rather disgusting room. Now, those of you who may have been on the Orient Express already will know that the carriages in there are quite small, but somehow they managed to make it somewhat spacious. The Sheikh was nowhere to be seen, however. I later learned that he'd got off one station before. After all, when the his minions did declare that all the souls on the board were going to be used for the ritual, they weren't kidding. And the strapping young lad was dressed out in his ritual fineries, and upon the floor lay the body of one of the butlers. Poor form, poor form. He'd use his entrails and his blood to draw some kind of arcane circle upon the floor which he sat within, and he was chanting away as he did so, and I could almost see the souls of the damned start to kind of flutter around the room, their wailful moans somewhat exaggerating this young poor boy. Could be no more than 20 at the time. But there I was, and I thought to myself, the best way to break any ritual, really, is to distract the castee. So I walked up to him, and as per the Queensby rules, I gave him a good swift punch to the face. Didn't pay to bother him that much. So I gave him a swift kick to the ribs, which didn't pay to bother him that much. And then I give him a second kick with much greater force to throw him across the room. He picked himself up laughing at me, saying that the arcane arts that he dabbled in had made his body impervious to damage. I couldn't. All but the most piercing blow would have no effect on him whatsoever. In fact, the bruises which hopefully would have formed from such a wallop were rapidly disappearing from his face. Now at this point I realised I'd run out of all my bullets. I had no gun to speak of anymore, and wouldn't lower myself to going back just the stowage to find another one. It would take too long after all. So there I was, an immortal sorcerer in front of me. A ritual has been performed to my very eyes. The world, in the local sense, going to hell and about to end. And I thought to myself, bugger it. Bugger it indeed. So I did. Turns out sodomy breaks rituals really, really well. I thought I was going to die. But then again, they always say, when someone first discovers something, what on earth do you think he was doing at the time? Look at kidney beans, for example. Although, to wrap up the story, give it some kind of conclusion, the authorities wanted to have a conversation with me with regards to my liberal use of firearms and the 3 bodies that I'd left in the dining cart, and the distraught and harrowed young man I'd left in the Sheikh's room. So I got off early, and I spent the best part of a month just wandering around Germany, enjoying the sights, the sausage, the beer, and their musicals. They do such fine musicals. Until eventually the heat died down, I could make myself back to my ship, which by that point had already been stolen by another braggart, but that's another story for another time. It took me a good 6 months to find it after that. But then again, the captain and his ship is never separated for too long, as well you should know. But given the theme of the occult, I thought I would ask our good friend over here, Lord Chief Justice Reginald Jasperclaps of the Court of the Withering Plots, his tale, which I'd love to hear again, of how when the infamous Satanist Aleister Crowley was possessed, not by a demon, but by some kind of celestial angel, and had forced him to a vow of celibacy and clean living. How on earth, Reginald, did you manage to exorcise this invader from Mr. Crowley? I seem to remember using not but an elephant stone from the local zoo, two young maidens, and some licorice. Yes, I would like to hear that story again. Thank you for your time.